Hi there, everybody. My name is Kate, and welcome to my channel, Trinergy Awakens Naturally. I was wearing a hat, so I have flat hair. Anyway, who cares? I want to talk to you today about mundane mysticism. What do I mean by that? I get questions sometimes from people. They got questions, and I have answers a lot of the time. People ask me in the work that I do with coaching, etc., and just learning and relearning and repatterning some life skills, etc. They ask me, well, how did you do that? And I think, there's not anybody that I've met so far, including myself, that wants to be told it's a slow and arduous process. We want stuff and we want it now, especially if we're hungry, thirsty, tired, needy, got to go to the bathroom, whatever it is. We generally want stuff now. And because we live in an age and a time where we can have, microwave life on a bunch of different levels, we can buy on credit, etc. We're used to getting stuff now and not really having to wait for it. And many times, many of us have lost the discipline of knowing what it is to save for something or wait for something, or not give in to the impulse of, I think I'll eat that whole bag of whatever, or I'll go and buy a new whatever. So and there's no shame on that, believe me. I still have to work with my own discipline needs as well. And if we didn't grow up understanding what true discipline is, we really sometimes get into adulthood and we want stuff now because we were disciplined wrong and bad, before that. So anyway, what I want to talk to you about is, how do we build the skills to be a mystic or a spiritual person, or somebody who just feels better about their life? However you're flying into this conversation, I could care less what your understanding is of spiritual self, God, you, whatever, all of that. I'm talking about getting in touch with that very primal self of us, the source self, the higher consciousness. I am talking about that. However, I'm not caring how you tool that or school that for yourself, whether you call it God, whether you call it universe, divine mother. It doesn't matter to me, because these are practices that I use, and it's universal as far as I care. So the way that I introduced a more conscious way of living for myself, and that's a great way to understand this, is through a more conscious, chosen living rather than the living that I was doing, which was just kind of reactionary and doing things in a very undisciplined way, or overly disciplined. Micromanaging every little detail with OCD is a extreme form of discipline, if you will. Over management, oversight, or under management and undersight. Many of us live in those extremes. The way that more conscious living became more natural for me was to introduce it at a very small level, because we all can go to spiritual practices, we all can go to church, we all can go to whatever, any guru that's got their way that they do their stuff has got their way, and it usually involves, changing diet, which would be a whole entire diet change for most of us. Or we need to pick up an exercise regime that we're not already doing, or we need to get 8 hours of sleep instead of the 4 that we hope will work, or we need to divorce the person that we're miserable with, or we need to have better boundaries with our children that are stepping all over us and being rude. As you know what, there's usually some pretty extreme measures that we're going to have to take if we're going to be fully awake. And I don't mean woke, whatever that means, because I've heard it mean a whole lot of things. And I mean awake and conscious of what we're doing, and not moving out of old programming or old habits or old childhood wounding or old toxicity or old dysfunction, old codependency, whatever that is. And so the answer to the question that, when people ask me, well, how do you do that, or how did you do that? I'd say I started very small. And I did. I started out with a habit that I wasn't very good about, brushing my teeth. So I got better about, at least, I couldn't full bore go into it. I'll be honest. I could not full bore go into committing to, 2 or 3 times a day. I was lucky if they got done, every day, along with hygiene, etc. However, in general. So I just started with, my teeth are more important. They're not in the greatest shape, and they're the ones that are losing the most. So if I was going to make a priority, let me go ahead and make the priority of, I'm going to brush my teeth at least once a day. And that became a problem. And so it seemed overwhelming that I'm not functioning on any level here where that's happening. And rather than continuing on in the shame spiral that I was in, feeling so bad about myself, because I'm a whole grown lady, and I was 50 years old at the time and was really struggling going through divorce and was just really having a hard time. And so there was a lot of shame with that. Well, I should be able to at least brush my teeth. What the hell? That's crazy. However, I was where I was, and I remember a therapist telling me, not too many years before that, before she retired and I moved away from her, she said, well, is there some reason that, you have to do an all or nothing? That's a pretty, common anxiety response. Is humans like to live in that black and white thinking and absolutism and stuff and the either or. If I can't brush my teeth 3 times a day and floss and, get all up in here with it, then I can't do it at all. It's either do everything or do nothing. And I really didn't stick when she said it, I'll be honest. It didn't stick. However, that came back to me that, I guess make an attempt, commit to making an attempt, not think about making an attempt. Actually, one time a day, go and rinse your mouth out with mouthwash at a minimum. Let's do that. And again, this was a very slow and painstaking process for me, but that's just where I was, with what I was doing in my world with extreme depression and, a lot of stress and a lot of just issues that kept me in bed with not being very mobile and being tired and hella depressed. So, and going through a divorce, so completely stressed. But when I realized that, it's okay if you need to start out with mouthwash, just get very honest with yourself about what your need is. That if you're not going to commit to actually brushing, then please don't say that you are, because you're setting yourself up for the sabotage that will feel like that tomorrow whenever you don't follow through. And then a few days goes by and you're further down in the toilet than you were, right now when you're even considering changing the pattern. So I decided that, okay, rinsing my mouth out with mouthwash is better than doing nothing at all. And that micro step, just feeling like I had management of some kind or agency of some kind, where I wasn't having it in my relationships, I wasn't having it with my money, I wasn't having it with my food or my body, physical fitness, etc. I wasn't having it in exercise. I wasn't having it anywhere else where I felt like I had any agency or management of me. I felt like I was being managed very heavily, and was in a lot of areas, by somebody or something else external to me. And it was that out of control feeling that, oh my God, if I'm responsible for it, I'm gonna have to drive the whole car and everything all at one time. No. We're just asking you to rinse your teeth. Let's get in here and decide that rinsing teeth is gonna have to be enough. And it was. And so that helped to break that chain of, look, if I can get in there and at least be successful, and call that successful and be okay with successful being, you rinsed your mouth out, congratulations. That was a real sore spot. And it took me about a week to get into that place of even being able to commit to that, because I was spiraling hard, and was just having a hard time finding any value in me as a human being, and it was being reinforced everywhere around me. So, it was an uphill battle. However, it couldn't continue to be in my mind, because I was considering, just not participating anymore, and that was not really what I wanted to do. And so I got inside me and decided, okay, that's going to have to be enough. And I rinsed my mouth, and when I started feeling the success of doing that, and it wasn't the next day, it took me a few days of, really seat this in and be okay that I rinsed my mouth. And, I made a big deal out of it with myself. Nobody else was going to make a big deal out of me, with my sloppy hygiene. And thank God I really wasn't surrounded by very many people. I was going through that, so I understand the struggle when you are. So it was a matter, though, of being very good to myself and praising myself and saying, I'm so glad that whatever it is that, was getting in the way of taking care of myself, that I couldn't believe that just rinsing my teeth out and my mouth out with some mouthwash wasn't enough. It absolutely is. I'm so proud of me that I made it here to do this, and now I'm done for the day. of what I have guaranteed I will do this day. And no other day was getting anything else done anyway. I was on bare minimum function and felt angry about the responsibilities to the cats and dogs that I had. Felt very troubled and overwhelmed by, not showering, not brushing my teeth, not, looking at myself very much in the mirror to see, wow, that's a lot going on there. And so I felt very guilty and ashamed of myself. And so when I could hear my own self say it out loud, we process it differently when we hear it out loud. So when I could hear that out loud and actually believe, hey, I've made progress here and I can let myself off the hook for the rest of the day. It didn't take very long, probably less than a week, but it probably took 4 or 5 days for me to just rinse my teeth out and be very satisfied with that I decided, okay, when I started getting, to where I looked forward to doing that, it's time to, let's graduate now. And it wasn't the next step to run into suddenly brushing them. It was to take a little baby cloth because my mouth was really tender. That was part of the reason that I wasn't doing it to begin with, was there was a lot going on in there with an autoimmune disorder that was out of control. So there was a lot of sores and a lot of soreness in there. But no excuse, no excuse, because it was not going to be helping any not to, get them clean somehow. So instead of shaming myself about not wanting to rake my whole mouth out with a toothbrush, I took a washcloth, a very soft washcloth, and just very, very gingerly did that, once I guaranteed I wasn't going to be hurting myself to meet my goal. There was a battle inside me of, I don't want to do that because it hurts. This is a lot of trauma that's taking place in here and a lot of damage in here, and I don't want to brush my teeth anymore. It hurts, And so, well, what's the way that we can get this done without it being so painful? And I took a little baby washcloth and just gently washed the front of my teeth as best as I could, and I did not introduce another part of dental hygiene or oral hygiene than that. And I also got some special salve for my lips. They were having a hard time. I had, like I said, an autoimmune disorder that was absolutely, wrecking my entire body, as well as my mouth was where it was really coming out. And so there was a lot of pain, etc. So very gingerly and very tenderly. But when I got the salve for my lip, it felt nice to get into the self-care of that I care enough about me that I'm going to concentrate on just this and speak very lovingly that I'm so sorry that this hurts, as if I was speaking to my own child, because that is a part of me that was feeling very childish, out of control, 12, that needed somebody to really care for me and pamper me and comfort me through this really hella difficult and grueling experience that I was going through on a physical, a financial, emotional. All of everything was falling apart. And so it felt very good. And after I did that for, again, not just the next day did I pick up the next implement. It took 4 or 5 days, just to do that, to be able to get through to my whole mouth, and considered that very good. And it went in that kind of gradual stepping, baby step and Bob. And I watched that movie a lot during that time. I was supporting other places in my life with, supplementing and those kinds of inspirational and amusing things, because when it wasn't amusing, it wasn't even remotely amusing. So I did supplement other ways. However, that's a personal choice, for you as to how you would do that. But when I could put the check in the block for those things, and was also really noticing and saying out loud that I appreciate me, and I appreciate that I have teeth, I have a mouth, and that I had the wherewithal to be standing here to do this. And on the days that I could not make it even to the sink to stand, I was having a lot of neurological issues and seizures and all kinds of things. So in those days when I couldn't do that, I kept a washcloth with the mouthwash, and I would just do the best that I could. However, I promised myself that I was going to show up for myself in one way or another, and I gave it an honest answer, an honest effort. And the answer I got back is, thank you for doing what you were physically capable of doing. And I didn't extend what my body, the rest of me, wasn't going to be able to walk over. I didn't, push myself or say, well, I should. That was, we're on a doorstep here of not making it, and this isn't the time to be that kind of out of line. And so taking those micro steps that, other people from the outside had a lot of criticisms. They were laughing, they were making fun. I mean, they were doing all kinds of weird stuff that, no, I can't, this is my life, and I'm on life and death here, of not wanting to be here to begin with, and my body might just help me get there. Then I can't listen to anybody else, because this has to be valuable to me. If it's not valuable to anybody else, if they don't understand or they don't agree, that can no longer matter to me, because it's literally, I'm to the point of I just don't care anymore. And so being able to take those baby steps, that helped immensely. And eventually, not to go through every iteration, it took me about 6 weeks, probably at least, to get a really good oral hygiene program going where, I brush, floss, etc. And I still lost, teeth in that. There were teeth that cracked during seizures, and, having poor hygiene, it was a mess. And so, visiting dentists that were willing to shame me about how I could be a whole grown woman, that, my mouth was a wreck. I saw that dentist once, and then I went to another one. Oh, this is the only time I'm seeing you too, because by the time I was taking care of myself, I'm not going to take any shit off a dentist that has something to say to me and about what I should have done. That's not where I am, and that's not what happened. And you don't know my life, nor do you need to know, nor am I going to tell you, what kind of a horse's ass you are for shaming me about why I'm here. This is hurtful and painful in the physical part of me already, and I'm not going to let you injure the emotional side of me that couldn't cope with all the things that were happening, around me, in me, to me, and from me. None of that. So I cut, dentists off, and by the time I got to the fourth one, friend, I found someone who was very kind, and it actually made me cry, not to get into that whole story, but that person, that the couple, it was a married couple that took care of me, and they did a great job, to handle the emotionality. But back to what's more important in this is those micro steps of the mundane mystic, or the, mystical amongst the mundane, that started carrying out into other areas of my life. And everybody doesn't have a dental hygiene issue, so when people ask me, how'd you do that, that's where I started. That was my entry point, because that was critical needs for me right there. Was this really needs attention right now, because there's a lot of pain and an abscess and all kinds of things that are just really, really emergency acute need stuff. So let's get it taken care of and get a good habit going. Well, after that was established, then it became finding ways throughout my day when I was already going to be doing something. I'm already going to the bathroom. Then whenever I would go to the bathroom to eliminate whatever I was eliminating, then I put into the practice, I eliminate, all negativity from my life. I release and let go. And thank you. I'm so grateful that I have a body that's able to let go literally and energetically any of the negativity that is around me or in me. I release and let go of resistance. I would just, say these things because it was believable. I'm actually releasing something from my body. It's a practice that I'm going to pee and do my other business, a few times a day, hopefully. 1717 is an 88. Thank you. Great, right? I'm already going to be doing that. Then how do I wrap that in? Because me getting started with a fitness program and 25,000 affirmations a day, and I'm going to, do a vision board, and I'm going to read this spiritual book or this self-help book and journal and do all these things. I had already tried that, and it was failing miserably, which is where I was, with failed attempts everywhere. And I need one less, a whole bunch less, like all of them less, to do things that way. So what I ended up doing was, in the restroom, I would make those affirmations as I was, filling up a glass of water. I don't know if you've heard or not, but we do know that there are water experiments that have been done, that the man blessed the water, they played really good positive music, classical music, that the water told them they felt it was good, because the crystals in it were made like snowflakes whenever it was frozen, and the other were, very low vibrational music that was played. It was very dark and ugly, and so I blessed my water, and I drink, a fair amount of water every day, and so that was a way for me to bless my water and to actually say kind things into my water and speak it and turn that into a mantra as well as I did that. And when I drink, thank you so much. I appreciate that I have water. I'm grateful to be filled with living water. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And mostly just taking the mundane stuff of everyday life, and finding a way to be very mindful and very conscious of those things, and pick something and then add that into my routine. And so it's probably more than when I was spending a half an hour a day doing affirmations and writing them down and stuff. I probably spend more time staying in that meditative state and in that consciously choosing every moment state as much as possible. It's easier for me to stay there because I was introducing it into a place I was already going to be. When I scraped my cat's litter boxes, I didn't like that at all. I had a bunch of cats at that time when I started this practice. I had 6 or 7 of them. I was babysitting a whole lot of other kids at my house. And so when I was scraping out those litter boxes, I didn't like it. It was exhausting physically at the time. And so how can I make this something that I don't hate these cats? I don't hate myself that I don't want to do this. And I don't hate that I wait 2 or 3 days. Sometimes it's absolutely disgusting. And then I'm in that shame spiral. And so I would say, thank you. I'm glad that what is no longer serving my cats or me is being scraped into this bag right here. Thank you very much. I am free. And everywhere that I could add that practice in, where I was speaking those affirmations out loud or, in my mind, mostly out loud, because it tracks into a different part of our mind. But when there were other people around, I'm not going to, do my whole thing perhaps. But I would say those things. And so it became more realistic for me to add, mysticism into the mundane activity, especially when I wasn't anywhere near, making drastic changes in my diet or in my mindset or anything else. It was going to need those little micro steps, baby step this, Bob, because she was really not digging the whole process of, I'm just done, I don't want to be here, and angry, upset, etc. And really staying out of those areas where I was going to recreate shame and sabotage and self-sabotage for myself again and again by getting onto my own case about why I didn't want to be the sole caretaker of 8 animals at the time. I think 6 of them were cats, and being the one that was dumped with that and angry and resentful and not doing it. And then because I physically just was having a hard time walking, scraping out a bunch of cat boxes was a little bit much, and not feeling resentment about that, and not being irresponsible about it either. That was quite a trick, and it wasn't going to get to that until I could get to the self-care of my own teeth, because that was the priority. So when people ask me, how do you do this? How do I, get this going? Should I do this? And there's no should in this. That's up to you and all of you. I can tell you what I did, and I can suggest some things that might help you. However, I'd find a way to very slowly introduce this, especially if you're feeling resistance, if you're feeling or you have a sense of not wanting to do, it's okay, staying out of that shame spiral immensely as much as possible. And that can be its own, micro step right there. Start with the one that's most critical needs for you, but wrap into your life, when I'm preparing food, it's a great time, when I'm cooking, to bless my food and thank, all of the vegetables, all the fruit, whatever it is, crazy as it sounds, I don't care, 2222, it's divine, that bless that and say thank you. I'm so grateful that I have resources for this, because I went, quite a number of times trying to feed my dogs on some dog food, and I mixed in rice that I was eating, and to stretch the dog food. We had a pretty lean few days in between divorcing and moving on. It got tight and very ugly, and so I was trying to find ways to stretch my budget and still meet the need. And so by the time I wasn't doing that anymore, I have a lot to be grateful for, and not looking too far into the future about, well, it's not fair, I should be able to have good food, I shouldn't have to go without. However, I'll tell you what, deprivation builds discipline, because when I was getting it back, and recovering from all of that financial devastation, it became easier for me to remember, oh yeah, I remember when I was splitting the rice I was eating with the dogs to make sure they could eat too, because their chow was running out, and we're hoping we make it to the next payday. Oh please, let that be So being able to appreciate, that I'm grateful for the food that I have, and now, I eat far better. However, being able to see that, go through that, and, it didn't have to be that cruel. It really didn't. The loss of all the money and resources didn't have to be that cruel. However, that is what I was handed, and that is what, was given to me. That was the life that I created with, who was around me that were willing to do those crazy, creepy things. And so, how am I going to fix the immediate problem? I'll get over the butthurt and the stank and the resentment and the rage and all of that. That can't be the thing that stops me from figuring out how I'm going to rebuild out of this, because I'll never get to the rage work or the forgiveness and all of that if I can't even be grateful or find a way to be grateful for what I already have, and be able to solve the problem of how I'm going to get more than just splitting my rice with the dogs to make sure they have chow, because I'm not eating their chow. I'm not willing to go there, and I'm willing to share the rice, and I need to find a better way to do this. And it wasn't going to be built up or even realistic to consider that entirety, the all or nothing. I'm going to need to look at the all in a very, very fractional, goodness, microscopic space, and get right there with it. And it took me a couple of years, I was probably at least 2 years going through those micro steps of adding in the appreciation and the gratitude. And gratitude is a great way to build in discipline. And when we find that in the mundane of, well, I'm really grateful I have a parking spot that's closed today and it's raining. Normally I don't care. However, I really appreciate that that's happening, or I appreciate that I have food that I'm preparing here, and it's so much better than it was before, because there's always somewhere where we can say, well, I could be doing better here. However, I like to look at back there and say, yes, this is true, and it's not an either or, Kate, and this was true as well, and could easily be true, and is true for someone else, and it was you, so how about you act like it was, and remember that, not as a shame moment, as a gentle reminder, a kind reminder from the universe of, hey, you do remember when things were far worse, and when you were scrambling to find somewhere to live, when your house was sold out from underneath you suddenly of, oh God, I lost this battle badly. Well, it's cool. Then don't get wrapped up in all the butthurt, the emotions, and the rage, and disappointment, and betrayal, and the wounding. We don't have quite time for that, because we literally got to survive this. And being able to build those quiet, solid practices at a very microscopic level, at the same time was eliminating the reason I was self-sabotaging to begin with, because of poor boundaries and poor understanding and poor self-esteem, and believing that I had no real value. And so rather than dip into it could be better, yeah, it actually absolutely could. It always can. There's always somebody that's going to be doing better. And there's always, somebody that could be doing worse, and it was you. On both ends of the spectrum, you've been doing better out here in some areas where you were doing worse at the same time, and you've been in other areas where it was far worse and you were doing better in other areas as well. So it's a matter of, what are the ones I'm going to put my eye on? How can I add this practice of extreme gratitude and mindfulness in how I choose to not be so blindly and blithely walking around just waiting for something to happen, or just assuming that whatever happens is just, fated to be. It's far more conscious for me to choose those moments where I can grab a hold of the management, the control, and I use that word in a very light way, the management of what I'm choosing and how I'm choosing. And even though it took a while, to get that really under good management to where I feel very okay in my environment now, and it's more of a mindful practice, a meditative life as opposed to a meditation session. I wanted it to be more that I felt at peace and balanced, throughout my whole day, not just, for the few minutes I'd be meditating and can't quite calm my mind down because I really have other priorities that need to be met. And no matter how much I meditated, and never got that practice going. I wasn't going to suddenly start brushing my teeth any faster by finding, something in that meditative state. I found relief sometimes, but mostly I found the rabbit running in my mind going, you really have other priorities. However, you can sit here and pretend like that, you don't have something else that could serve better. Not to say that other people don't reach it that way. I'm just telling you that's not what worked for me. And what works for me now is that I find myself, petting my animals and telling them I'm so grateful, to have you in my life. I'm grateful that you eat premium food now, that I eat premium food now, and, that those animals that I no longer could sustain with me in that financial devastation. I lost a couple of dogs in that I had to give away. Things like that, okay, well, there is the, extreme heartbreak in that. However, the beauty of it is the dog that I have today, he gets my full attention. My cats, they get my full attention. They get all of their medical needs met because I'm getting my needs met. They're getting their needs met, and I consciously choose for them, where it's my responsibility to do so. However, it didn't get there by suddenly affirming something for 30 minutes a day and doing a vision board. So that's just another possibility for a way to make the mundane more mystical and more magical, and be okay with, that not everything is going to be, a state of bliss, that I'm there just blissed out, taking care of the litter box today. However, I can promise you, when I do the litter box every single day, I'm not angry and resentful about the fact that, I need to do that, even though 5 years ago, man, I was just hating my life and hating being dumped with the responsibility, etc., and yet not able to face all of the conundrum in me of what I was going to need to do to fix that. So I hope that's helpful for you in some way, and I hope that you enjoy your day no matter what part of the day you're in, and remember to get within, because you're divine. It's absolutely fine, and it can deal with you without any problems. You can deal with you at a very microcosmic quantum level, as well as out here in the macro. We can deal with ourselves wherever we are, and we can meet ourselves wherever we are. It's really more about truly meeting us where we are, not where we are being told we are, not where somebody assessed us we should be based in their humble opinion that we don't need to hear or see. It's about really meeting me. Where am I really truly residing with this, and what am I truly capable of doing? Not what I think I should be doing, and not what anybody's telling me they think I should be doing. It's being strong enough to say, I'm going to need to do this my way, and for you to back up. And that's a whole process, and however long it takes, I would still rather have put in 2 years of being, looking like I was just an idiot and people making fun of me and finding it very hilarious, what I was needing to do to make my life work. I'd still rather have done those 2 years that it took for me to really move through that stuff, because I'm free of all of it, and I don't let anybody come at me with that sideways stuff out of their neck. Like, what? No, I don't do that anymore. And so it fixed at that microcosmic level. It fixed macro, because that's where it was being dealt with. That's just where I needed to meet myself, is that we're right here. Please meet me here and meet my actual needs. So, and not the need of somebody else who isn't going to be here in 5 years anyway and is making fun of you now. So, yeah, that's a whole story in and of itself that doesn't need to be said. It needs to be more disciplined to say, yep, thank you, get out of your head, that thank you very much, as I said, and get within, because you're divine, so gorgeous, so beautiful, and so, so, so lovely and fine. Take care of yourself, and I will see you again next time. Goodbye, my friends. Mwah.